Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Devils. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, there's a whole situation at the beginning where Massimo and his entire team gets brought in, and it's because before Massimo gets there, it's like crap. Like, could this be about the VAR? And it turns out, yeah, it is. It's like they dug their own graves in the situation, but obviously Massimo already got a preview to the whole situation. Well, first and foremost, we should start with the fact is, picking up where last week's episode left off, it was like the whole thing about like, oh yeah, Sophia and Massimo hooking up, and just kind of this awkward thing because she wakes up and she's like, oh shit, that happened. Because I think obviously she was meant to get close to Massimo, but she wasn't expecting things to take that turn of events, and it's like, oh, and so they're just kind of a little awkward around each other. It's like, oh, do you have any coffee here? Because it's like, oh, kitchen's meant for cooking. She's like, yeah, I think I read that somewhere. It's like, oh, coffee? Yeah, it's there. It probably isn't that good. No, it's so it's just super awkward. So now it becomes a situation, because obviously we need to find out what was in Ed's files, because obviously Dominic confirmed the whole Carrie situation, because it's like, hey, I was trying to protect you, but now it's like, now do you believe he killed Edward? Once again, he probably called for it, but he probably didn't do it himself. It was probably his fixer that did everything. The dude that's always doing shit for him. I think it's that dude who did it. Maybe not. We'll find out eventually. But I just don't see him getting his hands dirty. And even if he did get his hands dirty, it's probably his dude is probably going to take the fall for it anyway, if it ever came down to that situation. So I don't think Dominic would end up suffering the consequences. That's the whole point of it too. The rich and powerful, kind of untouchable. Kind of put other people in a position to take the fall for him. I mean, who knows? He probably has contingencies set up to make it so that, like, if shit ever goes sideways, it would point to someone else, not him anyway, so that might already be in place. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a last minute decision, but like, obviously we see how rich and powerful he is, the connections he has, like he has a lot of pull, it's kind of the whole point. But nevertheless, Massimo gets demoted. Who else but Paul ends up getting his job? That's interesting. Chris gets that position that Massimo was after in the first place, the position that Chris has been after this entire time. So now it's kind of a situation where it's like, Dominic, it's like, it's not going to be easy for you. You want me to sack you so you can go ahead and go somewhere else? It's like, no, you're going to stay here, but you're going to be working the floors again. So go out there, make me some money, so... Obviously, they all took a hit from this because, Paul's now their boss and everything. And even Paul being like, I'm sorry, Massimo, like, this was the only way I could get a job, and I needed a job after you fired me. But, I know that you're better at this than me. And Massimo's like, literally everyone here knows I'm better at this than you, and keeps walking. And Oliver's trying to apologize. Like, he's like, yeah, like, I'm worried, like, what if they end up calling the cops on me? Because a dude literally just got arrested at the beginning of the episode doing the exact same thing Oliver did. And, Massimo's got no sympathy, being like, well, you should have thought about that before you did what you did. And so, because for Oliver, everything he does, like, because he had the whole conversation with his girlfriend, and it's like, he's doing all this trying to make as much money as possible because he wants to put himself in a good enough position so he can get him and his brother out of that neighborhood. He wants what's best for his brother. He doesn't want his brother to end up on the wrong side of things, because later on in the episode, he had saw his brother outside, like, kicking it and drinking with some of the people, and it's like, he knows that's probably like a slippery slope, and probably if he says anything to his brother, he knows his problem. He takes that responsibility, like, I'm the big brother, like, it's up to me to look after him, so I have to do what's best for him, and I got to get him out of here as soon as possible. So I can't lose his job. I can't go to jail, because if I go to jail, who's going to be there to look after him, type of situation. So I'm sure all of that's flowing through Oliver's mind, and I'm sure he wanted some comfort from Massimo, but Massimo, to be fair, Massimo's dealing with his own stuff, but obviously letting Oliver kind of sway in the wind like that is kind of effed up in its own right. But obviously it's just like he's upset with them making the decisions that he did. Hell, even later on, like, the others are like, oh, look who's brown nosing the boss. If it wasn't for Massimo, you'd still be blah 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 blah. And he's like, if it wasn't for you two, Massimo would still have his job. Well, if it wasn't, and just like, nope, just let it go. It's just like, ugh. So no yay team anymore. Team's a little divided now, I'm sure. When it's all said and done, though, there's that interesting thing where you had Oliver being called into the office basically by Dominic. And Dominic's asking, because basically it's that whole conversation before how they're supposed to like, oh, we're going to sacrifice Europe, that whole conversation from last episode. And now it's about these particular countries within, Europe and being like, oh, like, obviously the euro isn't the dollar. It's not as powerful, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, how do we, it's all about public perception. Like, how do we change this? And left it to Oliver, and Oliver created the acronym PIGS. Portugal, Ireland, and then he had to add an extra I because he forgot about Italy, Greece, and Spain. And basically, because of their financial situations and stuff like that, that's where the term pigs comes from. And Dominic loves it. He's like, honestly, pretty damn good. Write up a report, hand it into Paul. It's all good, But when it's all said and done, though, like, obviously on Massimo's side of things, it turns out Daniel was watching Sophia and Massimo, which is super messed up in its own right because she's like, turn that off, like, and it's like, well, you got close to him, so it worked out. Like, because there's a part of her that, despite everything, kind of does like Massimo. He is a means to an end, but I think she is slightly on her way to catching feelings along the way. But it's also kind of effed up that he did that. Like, he recorded, like, obviously that was without her permission, but I guess it's kind of the thing of like, well, I do that to keep an eye on you. I've always got an eye on you. It's like, she didn't put up too much fuss behind it. So I guess it's just kind of like, that's shitty of you to do that, but whatever. I know the type of world we're mixed up in, maybe she's in her mind. It's like, that's your way of keeping an eye on me and making sure I'm okay. It's cutting through some boundaries, but she didn't fight it as much as, that's why I'm kind of like, I don't know, like, because this episode dives into it a little bit about her and Daniel's relationship, that it's like, obviously we still don't know the ins and outs to it, but he kind of probably, in her eyes, it's like, you're my savior, so it's like, it's whatever, like, I think even in his own right, Daniel, I think she believes in the cause, but also, like, obviously this whole Dominic situation, NYL situation is personal for her. Obviously we dive even more into that this episode. We'll get to that soon enough, but it's like, all right, you want Massimo helping you, we need to help him. So it's like, all right, Daniel's offering to get the Ed's files for you. And it's like, okay, but I want to meet with Ed face to face. I mean, not Ed, I want to meet with Daniel face to face. Why? Because, basically, it's like, oh, he'd be putting his life on the line. And it's like, I'm literally doing the same. It's only fair that he does the same. So, him being the opportunist that he is, Massimo makes a decision that he goes and visited Vic. She's one of the detectives that was working Ed's case. Turns out she was demoted, which is interesting. He got demoted, she got demoted. But basically, it's not what Massimo wanted. He had no part to play in all that. But it's like, I'm not working on a case, and not only am I not working on a case, I got demoted. So, but he comes to her, it's like, I need the access to those files because we both want the same thing, to find out. We both know that Ed didn't kill himself, that someone was murdered, and someone murdered him is what I'm trying to, sorry. So it's up, I need those files to figure out who did it. And what did she get in exchange? I will give you Daniel. And it's like, oh, okay. How do you have access to that? I'm sleeping with one of his associates. And it's like, oh, so you're going to stab her in the back now. It's like, all right, fine. So obviously we see that someone's watching him when he went down there to talk to her. My immediate thought, because obviously she had brought it up early in the episode. Sophia was like, well, do you know for sure that anyone, like, Dominic isn't having you followed or whatever? And it's, obviously he was worried about it, but, he kind of let his guard down and thought like, oh, I'm being paranoid. Dominic's not having me followed, and he wasn't really paying attention like he should have been. I mean, consider who the people he's dealing with. Like, I guess it shouldn't be too much of a surprise on Subterranea. I think I keep saying like Subterranea like every time. I don't think I'm saying Subterranea is the name of the. I think I always say it wrong every episode. I get a lot of shit wrong all the time. I do apologize. I've never claimed to be perfect. I make a lot of mistakes, but nevertheless. So when the time comes, though, obviously Sophia's setting up the deal. It's like, I'll tell you the spot last minute. You show up and everything. But Massimo had looked into he had his guy look into Sophia, which is ironic considering the fact of the matter is he found out about some stuff about Carrie, but he never told Massimo because he was paid not to say anything, which is, sad because Massimo doesn't know about that. Yes, he found out about the stuff about Carrie anyway, but because of Sophia. But the fact of the matter is, it's like that your go-to guy is actually kind of, somewhat of an opportunist himself, But he ends up digging up files about Sophia. We learn, obviously she was 7 when her parents died in an accident. I think it was it was a car accident, I believe. Then she was taken in by her brother who, owned his own business. But then, obviously it's obviously we know, and he found out, the tragedy behind that situation. But then he looks into it. He asking someone from the team. It's oh yeah, I know that situation. Back of my mind is how do you remember that so vividly? Don't you remember, Massimo? You the one that made that happen. And it's shit. Because her eyes have always been on Dominic. Now, I don't know whether everything that went down had Dominic's name all over, whether it's just simply because he was the head of NYL at the time, maybe he was the face of the corporation, or what I was saying, maybe whatever Massimo did, it had Dominic's signatures all over the place. Dominic got the big credit for it at the end of the day, so that might be why she views it as him, she needed a target for her rage. But basically we see in this situation Massimo realizing he's the reason why everything turned out the way it did. He laid the groundwork, which would eventually be the domino effect that led to her brother killing himself. The only family she had left, the only person she had in her family left, gone. Because she also learned Daniel and her met when she was 16. Basically, she did whatever she needed to do to survive. That seems like it implies some stuff. And then he's Daniel and her met at some party or something, and it's she was 16 or 17, and he's did he take her to bed? It's now that we don't know. So because that adds a question of what the relation because if that's the case, it complicates the relationship even more, because it's you could make the argument he might have taken advantage of her, because it's now he could have been looking at her purely as a daughter. Once again, you're having, webcam on of her having sex with Massimo. You put her in those positions. That's why I'm thinking it might be a thing of you saved me, so I'll do whatever you ask of me, even if it's some super shady and, because it's all for the greater good type of situation. We're on the right side of things, so whatever I have to do for the greater cause, the greater good, and I'll do. That's why I'm it seems a little icky when you, because that's why Massimo asked it, oh, did he take her to bed? And it's we don't know. So it puts that out there, so it makes their relationship even more little imbalanced. Obviously, it's a power situation, because he's the one that probably pulled her up when she kind of had nothing, because he's actually the one that paid for her college and everything. So it is a thing of she is indebted to him, regardless if he did, that puts him in a more powerful position where she would never go necessarily against what he would want. Once again, he's kind of her savior. He brought her up. He brought her into the fold of all of this. He made sure she went to college and paid for it in full and everything. So like I said, it adds a little. It definitely puts an asterisk besides their relationship to make you go what the hell is this? But learning this, the whole point I was trying to make though is when you look at this situation, it hits Massimo, because it's of course you're basically making a shit ton of money for this bank, but at the same time, it's off the back of destroying so many people's lives. You basically had a part in play in basically destroying Argentina's that bank situation, which led to there are consequences for your actions. But Massimo he is literally face to face. He literally slept with one of his consequences, because of the life he led. I mean, you can make the argument carries another consequence of it, but to know I think it's a little different, because it's this means I'm directly, indirectly, but also directly connected to her brother killing, her losing the one family she had, and so that guilt starts eating away at him, because he realizes Sophia's actually helped you out, but now I'm going to stab her in the back, considering all that she's lost, me being responsible for all that she's lost. And so he's talking to the Vic and our partner Henry, former partner Henry, meet up with Massimo, and it's okay, so you'll get the files the moment we get Daniel. And even Henry's how did you get those files? Don't worry about it. she was kind of like, don't ask, simply because it meant like, because obviously she got him a very shady way, because basically it was like, oh, let me get a copy of this. It's like, oh, that's not really ethical. It's like, really? I basically didn't turn you in for basically taking a few grams. He was like, I'm clean now. It's like, yeah, but your life would have been severely screwed if I had turned you in there, if I kind of, announced your improprieties, so, but it's like, oh, now, but with this whole situation, it's like we get two birds with one stone. It's like, what do you mean two? It's like, oh, we're getting Sophia too, because she's his associate. That means she's liable for all the stuff that he's done too. So when we take Daniel down, we're taking Sophia too. It's like, oh, doesn't it feel good to finally be on the right side of things for once? So, but obviously the location changes, and I was curious. I was wondering whether Massimo was going to go like, yeah, it's somewhere that it's not, but it's like he still gave them the right address, but he had to change of heart at the last second. He sped away from them to get a head start so that he could get there early enough to be like, hey, Sophia, you need to go. The cops are on their way. I was going to turn Daniel in. But luckily, her and Daniel got away in time. But obviously, he's like, he makes it seem like, well, they didn't show up. It's like, well, you're not getting the files then. And so they bounce. But when he returns home, Daniel's waiting there. It's like Daniel was the one that was watching him meet with the officer that morning. So he knew what Massimo was up to. Probably hacked some of his phones and stuff like that to probably hear some of those conversations. Maybe, maybe not. Whatever the case may be, he knew ahead of time. So it's like, you weren't even on that boat. But I think it speaks volumes that Massimo changed his mind. But what's interesting, though, is that Daniel was like, oh, we're actually the same. He's like, no, we're not. It's like, oh, yeah, we are. We're basically hitmen. Because he's like, I was an economic hitman that basically... he basically set up situations where it's like, oh yeah, there's this lot for this material. Having a country basically dedicate so much to getting that material, making a lot of money, but that country never seeing the money from that it basically go to his clients, and he's like, a lot of people died because of what I did. And he's like, you're the same. It's like, no, I've never killed anyone. Oh, yes, you have. Like, and obviously the flash of like, Sophia's brother. And it's like, Daniel knows that it was Massimo. I don't know whether it's because he's saying, Massimo, you're responsible because you were a part of NYL, or whether he knows specifically that it was Massimo that made that deal. He's the one that made that decision, who enacted everything that led to everything. So it was more him pulling. He was actually the one that pulled the trigger on that situation, both in a metaphorical and literal sense. And it is purely metaphorical, but there was an actual literal trigger pulled in the situation as well. So I'm curious, does Sophia actually know? Does Daniel later on tell her? Because a look on her eye makes me think, like, I don't know whether she knows, like, he actually kind of looked out for me, or whether that's because Daniel finally told her, like, yeah, you can't really 100% trust Massimo. Because like I said, everything's been about Dominic, or maybe it is the thing of like, oh, I'm going after Dominic, but I'm also coming after you, Massimo. I don't know. I think Daniel never told her. Like I said, I don't know. It seemed like Daniel was implying he knew that it was Massimo directly involved in that it wasn't Dominic that, like I said, pulled the trigger on this. I don't know. But now it's a situation of him telling Massimo, like, oh, you'll be on the right side of things, be a part of this whole organization and stuff like that. Once again, be the eyes and ears in NYL for them. Sophia ended up sneaking into Vic's place and ended up stealing the files, and brings them to him. He was like, oh, I thought I'd never see you again. But obviously for her, it's like, why didn't you go through it? Why didn't you let the cops, do what they were going to do? And he was like, and he didn't want to, because I guess he didn't want to outwardly admit like his fault and everything. So he was like, because I still needed, to work with you. It's like, he felt guilt about what happened, because he knows he's, once again, indirectly, but still directly involved with your brother's death. So question is, where do we go from here? Obviously, the whole situation also too, like, obviously you have Oliver seeing like the reports go public, because at first I was like, what? Because we saw Paul doing some shady stuff at the party. I'm like, what? Or at the bar or whatever. I'm like, what's that about? I was like, is he screwing over NYO? Was like, no, he's doing his job, because it's like, once again, putting pigs in the public lexicon, and obviously we hear like at the end, like everyone saying pigs, and what that represents and everything. So obviously, once again, the whole public perception, they were changing things, right? But also with things going the way they are, Dominic it's like, oh, we got to move up our plans because of stuff that's going down, because obviously it's like the U.S. is trying to downsize its debt by doing like a lot of technical stuff that is maybe a lot more clear cut than it appears to be. Once again, I'm an idiot to a lot of this stuff, so it's like a different language to me, so I don't understand a lot of it, but it just seems like Dominic has to move up his plans for whatever it is that he's really got planned. So I'm curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Obviously, now that Massimo has Ed's files and figuring out what he found out, what he died for, why his name's written all over. Like, we'll probably like dive into it immediately next episode, and see kind of what happens. Especially now, I think Dominic might be setting Oliver up to be like, oh, you're the go-to, right? Yeah. So he's probably going to push Massimo to the side so that he can take advantage of Oliver, and that's going to be the shame, because like obviously Massimo realizes like, basically getting higher up in this business means selling your soul, and it's not just he sold his soul kind of a long time ago, and sadly Oliver's probably going to be in that position where it's like all the money and power and position I get from this, eventually he'll probably take any position that Dominic gives him. It's like Dominic will turn him into the new Massimo. It's like, you're going to be my new protege, essentially. I'm going to take you under my wing, you're going to grow, you're going to be successful. So that's probably where Oliver's story is going to go, and the question is like, what's that mean in relation to, Massimo? Well, like I said, we'll ultimately have to wait and see how this all ultimately ends up playing out in the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.